The purpose of the Finnish Center at Sima Park in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, is to preserve and promote Finnish and Finnish-American culture through cultural, social, and athletic events. Although the center has undergone reorganization and name changes over the years, basically the same organization has been at Sima Park for over 100 years. Early Finnish immigrants established Sima Park as a place where they could gather for social, athletic, and cultural events. In Finland, February 28th is commonly known as Kalevala's Day. Our cultural program celebrates Finland's epic poem through the arts. Between 1828 and 1844, Elias Lönnrot, a country doctor, folklorist, and poet, traveled throughout forest villages of Finnish Karelia and the adjacent province Savo, noting down hundreds of folk poems which he fashioned into the epic we now know as Kalevala, which was first published in 1835.
Between 1829 and 1835, Elias Lönnrot collected and transcribed the oral epic Kalevala. Eino Freiberg, born in Finland, came to America as a child and settled in Westminster, Massachusetts. He is the first native-born Finn to do a complete English verse translation of the Kalevala.
Tervetuloa. On behalf of the Finnish North American Literature Society and Raida Publishing Company, I'd like to welcome you all to this festive occasion, the 90th birthday or celebration of Eino Freiberg. Or should I say Eino Friberg, the true Finnish name. Happy birthday, Eino. Onneksi olkoon.
You can say it anyway.
We praise him highly for his greatest work, a matter of giving us a wonderful Finnish-inspired translation of the Kalevala. What a formidable task. Again, picture Eino listening to the original Kalevala poems, putting them into Braille form, reading them over and over, line by line, in order to get the deep sense of the meaning of the words and their combinations and their particular alliterations. Then, line by line, testing the English translations until he found each line to express the sense of the Finnish words. This is real translation. That is, translating from one language, one idiom, one sense of civilization to another, and being familiar with each. Not what is otherwise called a dictionary translation, as others have done. I recall beginning to read the Freiberg translation a few years ago. Almost immediately, everything I had read before fell into place. I felt at home again. It was and is a great gift to have this new and real translation published for all of us. Eino's translation clearly reveals the pains and joys of the Kalevala story and puts these pains and joys into readable, enjoyable, and if I can use the word feelable English that reaches deep into the souls of every Finn and digs out all those long forgotten memories carried down from generation to generation. His translation comes from the sounds in his heart and the memories and experiences of his senses and truly captures the essence of being there in the age of the Kalevala.
The Finnish meter is not a regular meter to begin with. It was made up spontaneously by runa singers, and sometimes they changed names, changed verses, and all this. It was a spontaneous repetition of the traditional stories. They may go back 2,000 or 3,000 years, maybe more than that these very stories were told, but they got mixed up in the names and the events, of course. Somebody added something, and the next one dropped out something, so that but we got the essence of it. And the essence in the Kalevala is that singing is the greatest value for mankind. And the singing, of course, is not only singing, but if you read through the Kalevala and notice something that is very little talked about, it is an infusion of tenderness and love. And today is Mother's Day, and pretty soon it will be Memorial Day, and we have to remember. And I have to tell you a story about my mother. It wasn't something that she did. I'll tell you about the Kalevala mother later. We were very poor, living on the farm, and one Christmas, my brother, Wayne, Diana, wanted skates very badly. He was probably crying to get skates. My mother didn't have any money. The neighbor's calf died, and they took the carcass into the woods in the middle of the winter. They couldn't bury it. My mother went out and skinned that calf and sold the hide to a man who at that time bought hides, cow hides and so on, and bought the skins. Now that's a heroic thing for a mother. Not very many mothers could do it, but mothers will do things like that for their children. And in the Kalevala, you find a great appreciation and praise of mothers. That's the most outstanding one is the mother of Lemminkainen. Now, this Lemminkainen falls down the rapids or the falls of Tuonela, and the son of Tuoni down in the lower region in the caverns of the dead. The Tuoni's son chops him into 8 pieces and more, and the mother gets and throws him into the Black River down there. It's what the Greeks would call the Styx. It's and there's a black swan, by the way, who goes cooling away there to finish the picture. Anyway, this was done. She took a rake, so 500 fathoms, 500 times 6, that's how many feet it was she had, and she raked up the pieces of her son and put him together again. This great thing which your mother would do. And then you have Lemminkainen's mother protecting him and telling him where to go to hide. She finds a hiding place for in 28, because he had in a duel killed the master of oil, and he had to flee, and she found him a place to go and be in safety. The feeling is that the greatest character in the Gulliver is not Väinämöinen, it is not Ilmarinen, it is not Lempäinen, and it isn't Lovi. It is the mother. It is the mother. And I think not very many people have seemed to recognize that fact. It is the mother, and the mother created us. And then Ilmatar, she's the virgin of the air, and she's the one who apparently was the mother of Väinämöinen.
I'm going to read to you the Finnish words of the first poem of Kalevala, which deals with the creation of the world and with the daughter of nature named Luonnotar. Olipa impi, ilman tyttö, kävel Luonnotar korea. Ouostui elämätään, aina yksin ollessansa avaroilla autioilla. Laskeusi lainehille, aalto impeä ajeli. Vuotta 700 vieri impi veen emona. Uipi luotehet, etelät, uipi kaikki ilman rannat. Tuli suuri tuulen puuska, meren kouhuille kohotti. Voi poloinen päiviäni, parempi olisi ollut ilman impenä elää. Oi ukko, yli Jumala, käy tänne kutsuttaessa. Tuli sotka, suora lintu. Lenti kaikki ilman rannat, lenti luotehet, etelät. Ei löyä pesäksijoja. Ei. Teenkö tulehem tupani, aalloillen asuin sijani. Tuuli kaatavi. Aalto viepi asuin sijani. Niin silloin veen emonen nosti polvia lainehesta. Siihen sorsa laativi pesänsä, alkoi hautoa. Impi tuntevi tulistuvaksi, järkytti jäsenehensä. Pesä vierähti vetehen, katkieli kappaleiksi. Muuttuivat murut kaunoisiksi, munasen yläinen puoli yläiseksi taivahaksi. Yläpuoli valkeaista kuuksi kummottamahan. Mi kirjavaista tähiksi taivaalle. Ne tähiksi taivaalle. Luonnotar. There was a beautiful maiden of the air, Luonnotar, a daughter of nature, who grew tired of her life, of always being alone in the vast plains of the sky. She descended into the sea, where the waves impregnated her. For 700 years she drifted about as the water mother, swimming northwest, swimming south, to all the shores under the skies. Then a tremendous gust of wind threw her up on the foamy waves. Oh, poor me and my life. It would have been better to remain the virgin of the air. O mighty Ukko, supreme God, pass here by the one who implores you. A gull appeared, an agile bird. It flew to all the shores of the skies. It flew northwest, it flew south, unable to find a place for nesting. No, no, no. Must I build my house in the wind, my living quarters on the waves? The wind would knock down my house. The waves would carry away my nest. At that moment, the water mother lifted her knee out of the waves. There the gull made its nest and started hatching. The maiden felt an ardent fire shaking her limbs. The nest fell into the water and broke into pieces. But the eggs changed into things of beauty. The top of the shell became the firmament. The upper part of the egg white, the shining moon. And the speckles turned into stars in the sky. Stars in the sky.
In the Finnish epic, the Kalevala, the main character is a shamanistic hero with the magical power of songs and music. He is born of the primeval Maiden of the Air and contributes to the origin of the earth. Many of his travels resemble shamanistic journeys. Some of the chapters describe ancient words for magical spells of healing and craftsmanship. Nature and nature worship formed the center of all life for the ancient Finns. They valued peace, privacy, and silence.
The centerpiece of Finnish literature has to be the national epic, the Kalevala, which at last count had been translated into 51 languages. It's a challenge to any English translator because of its poetic form. The meter is trochaic tetrameter. That means accent on the first syllable and 4 feet in a line. A meter which is hard to duplicate in English because a trochee is accented on the first syllable. The meter is natural in Finnish because in Finnish all words are accented on the first syllable. In English the accent varies, but the basic rhythm tends to be iambic, that is accented on the second syllable. I never expected to do anything with the Kalevala, but Joan Lifrig Zug Bourret, she's got many names, of Penfield Press wanted a book on the Kalevala which would fit into her Words of Wisdom and Words of Wisdom series, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. She might sound like a Finnish lady. No. I didn't think it could be done, but you can't find that many proverbial expressions in the Kalevala. It's a narrative. She kept insisting, and I suggested broadening the field to include all kinds of striking expressions. She liked the idea, and the result was a small book called The Words of Wisdom and Magic from the Kalevala. Finland, before its accession by Russia in 1809, had been more or less a part of Sweden for centuries, with the result that the language of government, education, and the church was Swedish. The vast majority of the population was Finnish-speaking. I don't think the Swedish-speaking ever exceeded 15% of the population. But if one wanted to get an education and get ahead in the world, he had to learn Swedish. When Finland became a Grand Duchy of Russia, people began to advocate the use of Finnish. But I think it was only about, was it as late as 1860, or was it all the way up to 1890, before Finnish became the other official language of the country. Anyway, when people had started advocating Finnish, it was, you got what was called a language war. The advocates of Swedish considered Finnish a barbaric language unfit for scientific and literary discussion. Many Finns, incidentally, seemed to accept that idea, and there was, at that time, there was much talk about improving the language. appearance of the Kalevala at this point was a powerful argument in favor of Finnish, because here was this magnificent poem that everybody in Europe got excited about for a number of reasons. And Finn could say, "Nya, have you got a Kalevala?" To the Swedes who talked about the barbarity of Finnish. When Eino Friberg, one of the Kalevala's translators, describes the poem as the epic of the Finnish people, he's pointing out something I believe to be characteristic of Finnish literature. Other epics tend to be almost exclusively about heroes and heroic deeds. There are heroes in the Kalevala, but ordinary people have a place in it too. In that sense, Finnish literature is very democratic. It's not just about heroes, and the ordinary people who appear in it are treated as worthy of serious presentation, not as objects of comic ridicule. If you go all the way back to Aristotle and ancient Greece, in the theories of world literature, you will find this statement: tragedy shows men as better than they are, comedy as worse than they are, but there's no mention as they are. That involves showing men and women doing the kinds of things they do in daily life.
Under the direction of Judith Lindstedt, we have put together a program that I hope you will enjoy. The Kalevala is a collection of Finnish traditional songs, narrative, lyric, and magic, sung by unlettered singers, both male and female, living to a great extent in northern Karelia. These songs were collected in the field and ultimately edited into a book by Elias Lönnrot, who was a doctor. His life would give us cause to celebrate someday. It's an amazing life. He established the Finnish Literary Society and was instrumental in gathering these songs by the hundreds of thousands. The first edition appeared in 1835 and is now known as the Old Kalevala. And then in 1849, he put out another edition containing much new material, and that is now the accepted canonical edition that we celebrate today. The Kalevala is not a heroic epic following the adventures of wealthy aristocratic warriors and kings on a rather large stage with large armies, but rather the story of Finno-Karelian peasants of some indefinite time who rely largely on the practice of magic to carry out their roles. The main characters are Väinämöinen, an eternal sage, and an old, supernaturally gifted singer and a player of the kandela, who did not have very much luck with women. Ilmarinen, the second character, is an ordinary worker in metals, a smith, a craftsman. And then Lemminkainen, very much a ladies' man who often gets into no end of trouble. We have selected the story of the creation of the world by the Virgin of the Air, as found in the first poem of the Finnish epic, and is interpreted by the composer John Sibelius. This first of 50 poems is 344 lines, but the section concerned with this Luonnotar, the Virgin of the Air, who creates the world, is only 130 lines. And when he composed it, Sibelius cut it down to approximately 40, an abridged version. Called Luonnotar, she became the inspiration for a work for soprano and symphony orchestra that became one of Sibelius's favorite pieces. It's only 10 minutes long, but it did not become a world favorite in his time, and it was a source of great disappointment to him. 10 minutes only, but it requires an operatic voice, an excellent singer who understands the composer's feeling. And this afternoon we'll hear about how Sibelius found such a singer. The world in this first poem is created of 6 golden eggs that fall into the sea, plus an iron one. And not much is said about the iron one, but it turns up in the work of Ilmarinen as he forges the magic mill, the sambal, in the 10th poem. And we're going to hear about that perhaps in a painting that's going to be done here today. So let's turn to our artist, Scott Namey over here, whose curriculum vitae runs for 5 pages. He's currently a professor in the media/design department of Becker College in Worcester. He's taught at Franklin Pierce University, Florida Atlantic University. He has exhibited widely, both in solo and group shows, for 25 years. And his work can be found in public collections in several states. He serves as a juror for several shows in area towns. He's going to be talking to us intermittently through the program. Let's hear what Scott has to say.
Well, thank you, Roy. That's quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to all those things. Okay, so what I did, I talked to Judith Lindstedt, and the director of this, and she had suggested me doing at least an underpainting to start out so that you wouldn't be sitting there any more bored than what you're going to be when you watch me paint. And so I did an underpainting. Of course, this is dealing with a lot of the elements in the Gulliver. And here's a sample being fashioned by Ilmarinen, right? Is that the correct pronunciation? Close on, right? Thank you. And birch trees are very important trees to the Finnish people. We have a number of birch trees on our property that are, very important to us. So if we lose one due to the ice storm or whatever, it's not a fun thing. So birch trees had to go in here. So anyway, this is just a general underpainting. I typically will finish a painting in oil, okay? But it's not practical to do an oil painting in here, so I'm going to show you a little bit about the steps that would carry you through later on to what would be a finished oil painting. But this is acrylic paint. Okay, so I've got the underpainting done. I like to bring a painting up together, so I'll work on things kind of all over the place. One of the things I tell students is if you get bogged down in one area and you're worried too much about detail, if you get that to where you think it's perfect, but then you paint the rest of the painting, it doesn't work in the context of everything else, guess what? You're not going to want to change it because you spent so much time on it. So you want the whole painting to have a flow and come together. So typically what I do is I work broad brushes. This is a lot of what I did the underpainting with, general house painting brush, right? And then I work down to more details. So in this case, yellow colors or yellowish colors tend to come forward and cooler colors recede, and it's due to atmospheric perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working this foreground up with more detailed grass strokes, I guess, right? And like I said, don't expect to be too impressed. It's a tedious process. And feel free to echo or ask questions, whatever you want to do. Right? So I'll kind of work all over, generally making it look something like a mess at first. So as this process goes on, in theory, and what usually happens, the foreground will tend to come forward, and the background will kind of get pushed back further. By the way, this is the first horse I've ever tried to paint. So Judith has made me commit to finishing this so that she can use it for some other things which I will do. But again, I'm working in I won't call it a foreign media. I do like oil paint a lot better. But this is acrylic, so I'm using what I have at this point, what I can do here.
So if you come back with something more yellow, can you work wet on wet, or do you have to wait a bit, or?
You mean to?
Do you have to let that dry a bit before you come back with the?
You can. I generally do both. Like this is obviously dry when I came in, right? I did the underpainting a couple days ago, so I was tempted to just keep going, you know, and Judith was like, well, do an underpainting. She thought this was even further along than it should be because the idea was to show some of the process, right? But I told her there's no way I'm going to get painting this size done in the time we have. I'll just talk about the system I go through. So, yes, to answer your question, Jay, what I typically do is I'll do the underpainting and let that dry, whether it's oil or acrylic. If I was doing an oil, it would be the same process. Then once the underpainting is dry, I can work wet and wet, wet over dry, it just depends on the mood. There's certain things when you're working on them, particularly, you know, as I work on this, the birch trees, where, you know, you want to get that kind of gradient from light to dark, and you kind of have to work that wet and wet.
Scott, there's a question over here.
Oh, there is? You could just yell at it.
I thought that acrylics dry very fast.
They do.
So you have to work in the past with it.
They do. You can get retarders that will slow the drying time. I've never used anything like that. Even with oil paint, I generally just use turpentine, oilless turpentine. But today they've got everything. If you've ever seen a Dick Blick or Jerry's Autorama catalog, they're like this thick of all art supplies. I mean, I'll get students asking me, what's this? And I have to go to the book and look it up and say, well, that's a new product. I hadn't heard of that before. You remember that, right? Those types of things. Yeah, so acrylics generally you have to work faster. Again, if you're working something where you're working, you're working dry or wet, so that's we don't want that in there. Then you can let it dry and let it dry. So by the way, I don't know if I'll get to this table here, but this is, what was the pronunciation again? Okay. These are going to be rays of light or beams, because he's swinging the hammer, he's fashioning the sampo, and we don't really know what the sampo is, right? I just know it's this mythological, very important thing to the Finnish people. And I wanted this to have like beams of light coming out from it, so that would be where that goes. The sky, typically on the sky, what I'll do is I'll underpaint it with a warm color, because the sky is generally considered blue, right, in most cases. But in this case, I'm kind of liking some of the yellow, so I may kind of stick with that and just adjust it, you know, away from the light source later, but I'll figure that out. So with every painting I work on is like a myriad of decisions that you make when you're doing the painting. I don't have it's not a paint by number. I don't know how it's going to turn out before I start. If I did, why paint? There's no challenge, there's no fun in it. I have no idea how this is going to turn out.
How do you know when you finished it?
That's a question that's asked about. It's a feeling, I guess. And what I do, for those of you that know the Impressionists or have heard anything of the Impressionists, there was a French Impressionist, Pissarro, and he said he would put his paintings to the wall, turned away from himself, and he was always afraid that when he turned them back around, he was always wondering whether he was going to find monsters or jewels, I guess was the way. So you kind of have to get away from it for a while. You've got to look at it with a fresh eye.
Our next presenter is Kirsty Arden-McDamage of Harvard, Mass., who is an old friend of mine and is not unknown to the Sima community in that she sang at many, many Finnish-American events back a few years ago. In fact, she and I did a program on the Finnish composer Toivo Kuula at the second FinFest, which was held in Fitchburg, Massachusetts in 1984. So let's ask Kirsty to come up and tell us of how we here today are tied to both Sibelius and to Rwanda.
Thank you, Roy. Oliva impi ilman tyttö, kave luonnotar korea. Growing up, I heard those words and that music countless times. They comprise the opening phrase of Sibelius's tone poem, Luonnotar, which is, as Roy mentioned, for soprano and orchestra. He wrote it in 1913. The text is from the first part of the Kalevala, and like other mythological tales from numerous cultures around the world, it begins with the creation of the world. He invokes Luonnotar, the spirit of nature and mother of the seas. Today I will share with you my family's connection to Sibelius's tone poem, Luonnotar, to the Finnish-American community, and to the spirit of nature that we Finns cherish. I'd like to start with telling you about the first time my mother met Jan Sibelius. There's a hint right there. It was in 1955, And she was a soloist at the Sibelius Festival in Helsinki, along with Jussi Björling and Kirsten Flagstedt. Are those names that are familiar to any of you? They're prominent opera stars. Sibelius himself approached my mother after her performance, saying, "I hear you singing in my heart. I know that you know how to interpret my music." On shaking hands, Sibelius then said, "You are now shaking the hand that shook the hand that shook the hand of Beethoven." It was quite a name dropper, but it's pretty cool. He explained that his scribe, the person who transcribed his music for publication, also had scribed for Beethoven. So that means that I am 2 handshakes away from Sibelius and 4 handshakes away from Beethoven. I'd be happy to shake any and all hands. But let me get back to my story, beginning with my father. My father, Reino Arnio, was born in Turku, Finland, and emigrated with his family to the U.S. in 1920 when he was 8 years old. They settled in a section of Brooklyn that was nicknamed Finntown. His parents were of solid working-class stock, his father Viljo, a house painter, and his mother Hilma, a seamstress. Their social life was centered with the local Finnish hall, Imatra, and to the Finnish church. Sadly, Viljo died suddenly in 1925, leaving Hilma to raise a strong-willed teenager on her own. My father became a successful architect and talented watercolorist. Reflective of his Finnish roots, he had great love of nature. His buildings were designed to harmonize with their natural surroundings, and his paintings were generally landscapes. In 1953, he met with 2 other similarly nationalistic-minded Finns. Together, they created the Finlandia Foundation, whose charge it was to inspire, celebrate, and connect the Finnish-American community in the U.S. with ancestral ties in Finland. My father, in fact, designed the organization's logo with 2 joint hands across the sea. He had great professional and social aspirations, and his path would eventually lead him to meeting the most prominent artists and heads of state from Finland. But let's talk a little bit about my mother. My mother, Sylvia Bachman, was born in Superior, Wisconsin in 1920 to parents who lived at the Finnish Hall in Superior. Kaisa Kelloniemi Bachman was originally from Lumijoki near Oulu, and Kalle, nicknamed Kassu, was from Athens nearby Tampere. Like my father's folks, they were solid working-class stock. Kassu was a dock worker and Kaisa a homemaker. Their daughter Sylvia showed an early affinity for music. Imagine, during the Great Depression, what a dock worker sacrificed in order to cultivate his daughter's passion for music, purchasing a piano for her and paying for weekly piano and singing lessons. When Sylvia was accepted at the Juilliard School of Music at the age of 19, all 3 moved to New York. What devotion, no? In December of 1940, Reino, my father, and his mother attended the Itsenäisyysjuhla, or Finnish Independence Day celebration in Manhattan. Performing Finnish songs that evening was Sylvia Bachman, the young soprano who had recently enrolled at Juilliard. According to family lore, Reino turned to his mother and said, "She sings like an angel. Undoubtedly, she must also have the soul of an angel. That's the girl I'm going to marry." Now, never mind that he'd never met her face to face. As the story continues, Reino went backstage after the performance to congratulate Sylvia. Despite being only 28 years old himself, he carried himself with such confidence that she assumed he must be one of the bigwigs of the Finnish community that she had just recently met. So when he invited her on a date, she was afraid to offend an important member of the Finnish community. They married the following summer. So now to my mother's career. After graduating from Juilliard, Sylvia went on to perform with some of the most famous orchestras in the world, singing in 14 different languages. After Sibelius met her in 1955, he asked her to perform his favorite piece, Luonnata, at his 90th birthday celebration later that year. What followed was a whirlwind of coaching sessions at Sibelius's home, Järvenpää, outside Helsinki. My parents told the story of their first visit to Sibelius's home. He offered my father this cigar. Obviously, it's a cherished item that's been in my family since 1955. During that first coaching session with Sibelius, my mother was quite understandably enthralled and nervous about being in the presence of such a godlike figure. Her hands shook so much that she spilled her coffee on his white damask linen settee. Sibelius gave no notice to the settee, jumping up to assure that his guest was unharmed. 20 years later, when I was introducing my husband Chuck to my Finnish roots, we visited Järvenpää, which was then a museum. I told my mother's story to the guide, who allowed me to go beyond the rope barrier to sit on the white damask linen settee as my mother once had. And yes, the coffee stain was still there. So back to the story of my mother rehearsing Sibelius's Luonnata. One musicologist described the cruelly taxing and fiendishly difficult nature of the solo part for the soprano. There are leaps and drops of almost an octave, sometimes within a single word. That was a quote. Clearly, with those sorts of demands, any singer performing the piece needs to be a highly trained, with a nimble, high soprano voice. My mother went on to perform Luonnata for Sibelius's 90th birthday celebrations in both Helsinki and New York. The conductor was Sibelius's son-in-law, Jussi Alas. At the age of 7, I remember having my first girlhood crush on the charming conductor. Because of my mother's singing engagements, primarily in Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, for the next 2 years we lived in Europe. I have vivid memories of seeing my mother as Tosca being thrown from the parapets on a nightly basis, only to be resurrected in time for curtain calls at the end of the opera. After each performance, her dressing room was crowded with well-wishers and, oh, the bouquets of flowers. So I grew up in River Edge, New Jersey, which is a small town 8 miles from Manhattan's George Washington Bridge. Our house was large and gracious, and it was on the highest street in the town overlooking Hudson River. The Hudson River Valley, that is. In the wintertime, I was able to see the lights of the George Washington Bridge from the balcony off my bedroom. My family's orientation was always toward Manhattan, which we could see in the distance, toward its cultural, professional, and social opportunities. My parents received recognition from the government of Finland for their work. My father was awarded Finland's Knight of the Order of the Lion, and my mother the Knight of the Order of the White Rose. With my parents' careers and stature in the Finnish-American community, they were on the A-list for events at the Finnish consulate and attended countless concerts, exhibits, lectures, plays, and parties. They also frequently entertained dignitaries at our home. From a very young age, perhaps as early as age 6, I passed hors d'oeuvres to artists, musicians, diplomats, journalists, writers, and even a Finnish-born Miss Universe. With names like Hannikainen, Kuusisto, Kallen Kallela, Katajavuori, Kuusela, the list goes on and on. When President Urho Kekkonen visited New York in the 1960s, my parents sat at the president's head table, and I was part of the honor guard greeting him, and I was wearing Finnish national costume. He singled me out for a conversation, and I remember struggling to say something coherent in Finnish. I still cringe when I think of it. Where were you then, Marita and Lisa? Not all of my youth involved wearing fancy dresses and entertaining famous people. Most of my summers were spent in the idyllic setting of Beach Pond, Connecticut, with my loving grandparents. My parents would drop me off the day after school ended and would pick me up again on Labor Day weekend. How I cherished my summers at that beautiful remote lake. At the time, most of the lakeshore was virgin forest. The area had a large Finnish population, and the people we interacted with tended to be those of Finnish descent. My grandmother Kaisa never really learned to speak English, and my grandfather Kassu was most comfortable speaking Finnish. On a typical morning, my grandfather and I would row across the lake to harvest fallen trees and take them back to the cottage. I would perch on an overturned tar can, and we would chat in Finnish while my grandfather sawed wood into the lengths suitable for the sauna. And by the way, our sauna was the best. Even my cousins visiting from Finland agreed. I spent most of my summer days tearing around the lake in my red wooden rowboat with friends, swimming and going to nearby Aura Hall for dances. It was in sauna, or sitting around a kokko, or bonfire, that I vividly remember elders sharing their stories and singing songs when an accordion would magically appear, transmitting their knowledge and passion for their Finnish culture to the next generations. They also spoke of their love of nature, explaining the attributes and interactions of plants, fish, birds, sky, water, fire. Grandpa Kassu, in particular, would wax philosophical, making connections between interrelationships in nature and current political events. I attended Northwestern University in Illinois, majoring in sociolinguistics. In my senior year, I had an extra time slot to fill. Northwestern has a very strong musical school, so I decided to take some voice lessons. For the next 20 years, I followed somewhat in my mother's footsteps, specializing in the performance of Finnish folk and art songs. Nowadays, I carry on my Finnish traditions with my family. I love to share stories of my heritage with my sons and grandson. We listen to and sing songs. We bake pulla and pannukakkuja. At Christmas time, my vast collection of joulutontut, or Christmas elves, come out of hiding. We read Muumi stories, Norse myths, and of course, tales from the Kalevala. And I even have my copy of the Canine Kalevala, which is pretty hilarious. I've also been known to brag about Finland's current social, economic, and educational policies. So growing up with parents so committed and passionate about their Finnish roots, and especially since I have an unusual name by Finnish standards, I've had countless conversations with people over the decades explaining my name and heritage. In preparing for this talk, I've been doing a fair amount of thinking about what it has meant to be Finnish-American. What forms a Finnish identity? Is it sisu or grit? Is it in our DNA to appreciate nature? As John Martin Crawford wrote in the preface to his translation of the Kalevala, which I read just recently, for the Finnish people, nature and nature worship form the center of their life. My good friend Tuula Himanka said recently, for Finns, the love of nature transforms into a deep listening to the music of the spheres. When her father, Jussi Imanka, was in a natural setting, he would say, "This is my church." I'd love to hear what you think. So I'll end as I began, with a section of the Kalevala that Sibelius used in his piece Luonnotar. As Roy mentioned, it concludes with the goddess of nature's eggs forming the earth, sun, and moon, and the brighter colored bits on the shelves rising to become the stars of heaven. Thank you for letting me tell my story.
Now we're going to hear the performance of Luonnotar on DVD, sung by Taru Valjakka, a leading Finnish soprano of the 1980s, who I had the pleasure of hearing at the Metropolitan Opera when the Finnish Opera came to New York City 30 years ago. And on this DVD, the orchestra is the Bournemouth Symphony from England, conducted by a well-known Sibelius expert, Pavel Beredund. He came to Boston maybe 20 years ago. He was very ill. At that time, he was nearing the end of his life. He came and his son brought him out to the podium where he sat on a chair and proceeded to conduct 3 Sibelius symphonies in the same program, which was unheard of. So we have an excellent team on the video, and added to it by the expert hand of Judith Lindstedt of ZZ Creative Video Productions and host of the television show Uncommon View. She has added wonderful pictures and a helpful English text to make the next 10 minutes an enjoyable experience for all. So you're not going to see the orchestra, you're not going to see the singer, you're going to see Judith's work. Okay, let's dim the lights and see what happens.
Ilman tytte,
had the chance to thank these folks right here who are the technological committee who put this thing together. And they were here several days trying to figure this out. So I'm very, very happy for them. So now I think we're going to have the pleasure of welcoming some old friends. Let everyone do like Finnish folk dancers and the Oivalilo musicians. And I'm going to ask somebody to come up here. Is it Leila? Is it Tina? Leila? To take charge of this segment of the program.
Red Tulip Finnish dancers present a parade of Finnish traditional dress. The traditional dress of Finland dates back to the 16th and 17th centuries. Finland, being a country of mixed cultures, has both European and indigenous influences in much of the traditional clothing, and many designs are based on the traditional festive clothing of Finnish peasants. The clothing also varies by region due to its own historical, climate, and cultural values. A true Finn usually has an attachment to the countryside. This too influences the traditional dress. You will see bright, vibrant, and interesting colors, as often are found in nature. And the dyes used are naturally based pigments. Traditional Finnish costumes are usually rather warm because the weather in Northern Europe is severe and cold. The clothing is typically made from wool or cotton to keep you warm. Accessories are made of leather and metal, and detailed handicraft is evident throughout the clothing. From the dyeing of the wool materials that are woven by hand on looms to crocheted laces and bright embroidery, all crafted by hand. The traditional dress for women in Finland may consist of a skirt or jumper, blouse, vest, jacket, apron, and a headdress. There's quite a variety. Traditional headdress, which may be a cap, headband, hat, or scarf. You may also see a silk scarf around the shoulders. Shoes are laced or with buckles. Some of the women's costumes include a pocket. This hangs from a band and is tied under the hem of the bodice. On top of the apron, usually on the left side. This is where she would keep her supply of embroidery needs. Dick is wearing his traditional costume from the southern part of Sweden. His mother obtained the pattern and commissioned the family's friend to sew the shirt. His pants buttoned with 4 side buttons at the sides. The traditional dress for men in Finland may include a vest, a waistcoat or coat along with long or knee-length trousers. Shoes are either laced or buckled, and a traditional hat or cap may be worn. Stirpa is modeling a dress that represents a special time during the 18th or 19th century. Any guesses? Well, brides in the 18th century were married in their local costumes, and in the 19th century began to wear dark-colored dresses, usually black. In the days of old, the bride was adorned with a bridal crown, standing high at the back of her head, all glittering with beads and gold and silver paper, like decorations on a Christmas tree. It rested on a little cap of beautiful white lace, softening the cheeks. Long ribbons would hang down from the crown, down the back. Eventually, the high crown went out of use, and the brides wore a myrtle wreath with a long white veil.
Clayton and Sally Tracy are modeling the national dress of Finland. National dresses were first made and worn in the late 19th century. During the era of national romanticism, the awakening of national spirit, and the definition of the national costume of Finland, the kansanpuku was established. These outfits were worn for the first time as a collective presentation of 8 different regional dresses. Thus, the national costume of Finland was born and represents the various regions of the country.
Shirley Matson's costume represents the region of Central Karelia. It has a dark blue vest with pleats and closes with a buckle fastening. The blouse is a natural cotton and is adorned with a silver or bronze pin. Shirley's pin is a Kalevala design manufactured in Helsinki, Finland. The pleated skirt is a narrow stripe of red, black, and white, and the trim on the pocket matches the skirt. White socks are worn with full dress, a handmade leather shoe, which she is wearing one. Edwin Mattsson's costume represents the Finnish national costume. He is wearing the traditional and well-known Finnish costume belt. Men wear this belt on special occasion to display their kukko knife from the side. Sirpa's costume is on loan from Maya Lord, a member of the Finnish Center of Science Park. Her costume represents the region of Mansala. Sirpa on an original Suomi native, and her mother also wore this traditional regional dress in their days in Separi, Finland. The skirt is striped in white, green, red, and yellow, and black on a blue background. The bodice is buttoned with metal buttons. The socks are white, and her shoes should be black and buckled. We thank Maya for letting us borrow her costume. The ensemble includes trousers, vest, shirt, and jacket. The long pants and jacket are made with black wool, and the red vest adds an air of vibrancy to the entire outfit. Both the jacket and the vest have gold-colored buttons. This regional costume would have also had a handsome felt hat to top off the ensemble. Mark and Layla have traditional handcrafted birch bark accessories, a wide brim hat, and a basket with a shoulder strap. Both items came from Fitchburg, Finland, where Layla's beloved aunt was born. Mark also has a traditional kukka knife, a donation from Judith Lindstedt of Fitchburg. Layla's costume is a donation from Kirsti Gamble, who spoke about her fun family facts following famous things. That's not easy to say. This is the costume worn by her mother, Sylvia Bachman Alfio. We are grateful to have this special costume as part of our collection. Tina is wearing a costume from Alice Soyanen, currently residing in Ludlow, Vermont. This costume belonged to Alice's cousin, the daughter of her mother's sister. She wore it around the time of the Winter War, when feelings of nationalism were strong. Her cousin was only 12 or 13 at the time, and this costume fits Tina perfectly. During this time, there were battles near Italy close to her relatives. The blouse was hand-woven of linen. It had a stand-up collar and long sleeves with red embroidery at the cuffs. The missing apron was white linen with white crochet decoration about 2 to 3 inches from the bottom. The missing pocket was multicolored and had a 2-inch mirror in the center. A young girl would have worn ribbons in her hair, one of red, white, and green, and a yellow touch. We are pleased to have this wartime outfit as part of our costume collection.
Any questions?
Sure.
I just wondered why you prefer oils to acrylics.
Well, as you can see, I go over things a lot. I'm pretty busy. Some people are, they just put it down and that's it one time, but I rework things and the oil gives you a lot more time to do that. So I could have this painted and it will still be wet tomorrow, especially the real thick globby areas on the birch trunk. And I like to use texture where texture is needed. In that case, I can come tomorrow and I can start pulling that paint around. And the paint will have a different viscosity. It will have started to dry. So you can do things with it that you couldn't do in the first day when it was wet and wet. But mainly because I make a lot of mistakes.
What is your primary brush that you use?
I don't know as I have a primary one. I like what are called the flats, which are the longer bristle landscape brushes. So this is more of a, this is well, it's not flat. The rectangular and the, anyway, they're longer bristle. If you're a portrait painter, you use what's called a bright a lot more, which is a shorter, shorter bunch of bristles. And I like it because you can really load the paint on. So I'd say just a half to 3/4 inch flat would be my favorite brush. That answer the question.
How do you decide how many elements to put into your painting to make it balanced?
Well, that's a good question, and even when I decide, it can change. The painting has a life of its own. Again, I like it to be that way because if I knew exactly how it's going to come out before I started, what's the point of me doing? There's no challenge, there's no mystery, there's no surprise. So, in this case, I think there's going to be more that goes into this actually. Whether it's trees, to help the space go back better. That's a great sentence, I know. I'm better with pictures than I am with words. But in this case, I've drawn a pencil sketch of it, and I kind of had the elements set up, so there was a lot of erasing and designing the pencil thing. But that changes a lot when you expand to a larger scale painting. And then you're throwing color into the mix, so it can make you make a lot of different changes. I just feel like there needs to be something in this space here. I don't want to busy it up too much, but there needs to be something in that middle ground, besides the juniper tree, which is what that is. Juniper tree. Yes?
If I were to paint and I don't, my natural inclination would be to hold the brush closer to the bristles for more control, but you're holding the brush at the end of the handle.
Yeah, well, I do get closer to the bristles when I'm doing more detailed stuff, but one of the things they teach you, which I think through the years has come across as being the right thing to do, is that when you're painting landscapes especially, they say you should paint from the shoulder, not the wrist or the elbow. When you get to the details, it's a different story, but when you're trying to get that fluid motion and cover the big spaces, you need to be free. You need to get some activity and movement into it. And then as you tighten up, you can start to move in the direction that you're talking about.
Are your sons involved in painting also?
These guys are pretty good painters, yes, and they paint pretty much exclusively in acrylic. And they didn't learn from me. They're better than I am. Is there a hand back here?
Do you ever use a mirror to help you get a different perspective?
I do, yes, I do. Pretty much when a painting gets to a certain point, I'll look at it in the mirror many times. Yep. Some of you have been around the painting world a bit. Some of the tricks, right? Well, don't forget that in the days of Rembrandt and all that, there were apprentices that worked under the masters, and all that information, the way they painted it, the slick surfaces, they didn't want you to know how they did that. Those were all secrets that were passed down. Nowadays, art is about more of the art is about, hey, let's show the people how we constructed this. All right, let's leave the brush strokes in there. Let's let somebody who's really curious about it be able to come up to and analyze how we did it. If the people aren't interested, they're not going to look. But for me, I'm always interested in seeing how a painting is constructed, whether it's an abstract painting, whether it's a landscape. Just go up there and say, oh, I see what he did. He dragged the paint over. And being a painter, I guess maybe I know some things more than the general public, but the texture fascinates me, the texture and the construct.
So we're going to do Lunti, and I chose Lunti as our performance dance as it invokes a sense of joy and frolicking and enjoying the essence of youth. The robust Lemminkainen may have frequented a village dance to pass time with women and was known to be careless with his morals. On the other hand, the fair maiden Kuliki of this section, she was being courted by the potential suitors from distant lands where she could dance the night away. So this is our performance dance, Lunti.
Hi everybody, I'm Scott Niemi. I'm here at Sima Park, beautiful Sima Park, on a beautiful day. I'm here to talk about my painting behind me, which is called Forging the Sampo. I began the painting as part of a Kalevala celebration which we had back in February, which was, funding was provided by the Finlandia Foundation, so I was very grateful for that. There were some general themes I wanted to put in there. I wanted Ilmarinen in there, Forging the Sampo. He's obviously in the back. I wanted the juniper tree portrayed in there, as well as the horse that Väinämöinen uses on one of the occasions in the Kalevala. The horse was the last thing I worked on. This is actually the first horse I've ever painted. So for me, it's I can say it's the best horse I've ever painted at this point. And we're going to leave it at that. We had to put birches in because birches are very important. As far as basic painting construct, I always try to think of foreground, middle ground, and background, all being important. And how do you lead the viewer into the actual piece? I'm not into, it is a two-dimensional surface, but I'm not into the type of painting where you're emphasizing the two-dimensionality. I'm more interested in showing some semblance of 3D space. So I thought the meandering river would be a nice touch to lead you back into the, the background with the mountains. And yeah, so the difficult parts for me were the horse, and believe it or not, getting the grass and the flowers and all that to work, and to read like there's this kind of space that's leading you back. This beautiful meadow area with nice mountains in the back, and while the Ilmarinen is working away to forge this sample.
Were you inspired at all from the Kalevala itself by any reading?
Yes, I was. In fact, it was a really good project for me, and again, I'm grateful for the grant because to be honest, I hadn't done much reading of the Kalevala at all. And so to get into it and read the mythology, and the mythology of the origins of the Finnish people was quite interesting. One of the things that I've kind of formulated through various advice from different artists, things I've read and things like that, is that when you're painting trees, exaggeration is good. You take the natural form and exaggerate. And as in with still life painting, you always want to think in terms of odd numbers. So you don't want to paint still lifes that have 4 objects in it. You want to go 3, 5, 7, etc. So I try to do that when I'm grouping birches together. And as with all trees, birches are probably the trees that exemplify this more than any other tree, but when they're growing close to each other, they tend to grow away from each other. They're all trying to reach the light. They're all trying to reach the sun. So I always think in terms of, as it was quoted somewhere, nudes dancing on a hillside. They're these lyric forms, they're living things, they change through time. And so you try to get into the spirit of the tree in a sense, and paint them that way.
What did you think about this painting here?
Well, it's very beautiful. It's very mystical at the same time and very familiar from Finland. I think it captures very well the Finnish, the inner thing in Finns, like the birch trees. Even though we don't have that sharp mountains in Finland, I feel like the mountains bring the mystic into the view. So it's more it feels like I'm in the middle of Kalevala now when I'm here. So it's really nice.
And what did you think of the horse?
Oh, you're sitting on sitting on the horse. It's very Finnish. We have the Finnish original breed called Suomen Hevonen. And just recently, it was 100 years old. You actually probably knew that as a horse person.
I did.
Yes. So I think the drafty look of the horse is capturing the Finnish national horse breed very well. And I think it's a crown piece of the picture. Runo 10. The Forging of the Sampo. By the nuclear field of Osmo, Väinämöinen hoed his stallion. From the slate he raised his head. Here's a clicking from the smithy. Here's a clanking from the coal shed. Old reliable Väinämöinen straightway steps into the smithy. There he is, the mighty smith. Clinking, clanking, hammering. Oho, said Smith Ilmarinen. Oho, you old Väinämöinen. Where have you been all this time? Where have you been hiding out? And old Väinämöinen answered, up in twilight Pohjola, in the gloomy land of sedges. That is where I've spent my time. That is where I have been living, visiting round in Lappish quarters, there among great enchanters. Jop on seisottui oronen Osmon uuden pellon päähän. Siitä vanha Väinämöinen päätä korjasta kohotti. Kuuluvi pajasta pauke, hilke hiili huonehesta. Vaka vanha Väinämöinen itse pisti he pajahan. Siellä on Seppo Ilmarinen, takoa taputtelevi. Sanoi Seppo Ilmarinen, oi se vanha Väinämöinen, missä olet viikon viipynynnä, kaiken aikasi asunut. Vaka vanha Väinämöinen itse tuon sanoiksi virkki. Tuolla olen viikon viipynynnä, kaiken aikani elellyt. Pimeässä Pohjolassa, summassa Sarjolassa, liukunut Lapin lauilla, tietomiesten tienohilla.
Name of the song is Väinämöinen ja vene. Väinämöinen and the boat. In English and Russian, but in Finnish and Karelian it's Petro's Boy. It's a song about driving home. Home, sweet home.